Bonjour et bienvenue sur ma chaîne. Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Cindy. In today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 tips to stop translating in your head. Now, the reason it's very important you learn to do this is because languages don't usually translate well when you translate them word for word. For example, if you translate what you're thinking in English into French word for word, you'll find that very often people don't actually understand what you're saying. This is because not only is the grammar different, but also because people often speak in their own languages using ready-made phrases that everyone uses, and those may not be the same in both languages, if that makes sense. For example, you might be using one expression to say something, and then if you translate that word for word, it makes no sense whatsoever in the other language because they use a different expression to express the same meaning, right? So let's get started. My number 1 tip for you to stop translating in your head is to listen to some French every day. Now, if you don't have a lot of time to set aside just for that purpose, you can always put some French on in the background. So for example, you could listen to some French music, or you could listen to French podcasts, which don't require your full attention. You don't need to be watching something. And at the same time, you could be cooking or cleaning or whatever it is that you have to do. If, on the other hand, you can set aside some time to just concentrate on this activity, then I would advise you to watch cartoons if you're a beginner. So watch cartoons aimed at children. For example, you could watch Peppa Pig. If you've got kids, all the better, because then you won't feel silly doing it. But yes, I always advise beginners to watch cartoons aimed at young children because the enunciation is very good and the meanings can always be deducted or deduced, can't remember which word it is, but anyway, from the pictures that you're seeing. And I find this to be particularly true with Peppa Pig. That's why I always recommend this one. So if you're interested, look for Peppa Cochon instead of Peppa Pig, you know. If, on the other hand, you're at a more advanced level, then maybe you could find some French films to watch with or without subtitles. And you don't have to watch the whole film if you don't have enough time. Just make sure that you do a little bit every day. My second tip for you to stop translating in your head is to speak to yourself in French when you're in private. Obviously, you might not want to do that when you're in public because people might think that you're crazy. But if you're in private, speak to yourself in French. And you can start small. So, for example, you could just describe what you're doing or what you're seeing, but do it as often as you can, because also when you are speaking, it's easier to be aware of the mistakes that you might be making than if you're just thinking. However, if you're in public, then switch to thinking in French, because that way nobody has to know what you're doing, you know? So, for example, think about what you're seeing, what you're doing. So, I don't know, for example, un homme traverse la route, il a un t-shirt bleu, le feu est rouge, je vais faire les courses, that kind of thing. Because the more you do that, the more the language will come to your mind automatically, and then you won't even have to be thinking at all about what you want to say in English first. Do you know what I mean? Like, it will come automatically in French in your head when you want it to be in French. The more you speak to yourself in French and the more you think in French in your day-to-day life, the more automatic it will become for French to come into your mind when you want to speak French, rather than for your thoughts to come in English first, even when you want to speak French, if that makes sense. Basically, practice makes perfect, and the more you practice, the more automatic the process will become. My number 3 tip, and this will not apply for everyone. If you're a beginner, this may not apply to you, but if you're a bit more advanced, then I would advise you to ditch your bilingual dictionary and get a monolingual dictionary. So a dictionary that only has French in it. No English whatsoever. So for example, if you come across a word in a French text that you don't understand, look it up in the dictionary, read the definition in French and try to understand what that word means from the French definition. Because doing this will set your brain to French mode, if you like, and therefore it won't automatically revert to English all the time. So it will help you not to translate in your head, because you will learn the meaning of the word through French rather than through comparing what it means in English, if you know what I mean. You won't associate the meaning of the French word with its translation in English because you won't have seen the translation. So doing this trains your brain to just think in French and not in English. What is important to remember is that it's much easier for your brain to think in French if you don't keep bringing English into it. When you are at an intermediate or an advanced level and you sit down to do some French, try not to resort to English to help you. My fourth tip is, I've got cat hair on my fingers. My fourth tip is to read as much as you can in French. So if you're a beginner, you could read the French news, or you could read books aimed at children. Again, because just like with cartoons, the meaning is much more obvious from the pictures that may be in the book. If you're intermediate, you could read novels aimed at teenagers, or you could read books that you've read before in your first language. And of course, if you're at an advanced level, you can read anything you like. What you need to remember is when reading French, it's not important that you understand every word. What's important is that you understand the gist of the story. So you come across a word, 2 words, 3 words that you don't understand, don't worry about it. Just carry on reading. Don't stop to look it up in the dictionary unless you absolutely have to. But if you're just reading for pleasure, don't look it up in the dictionary. Just carry on reading and make sure you get the gist of the story. That's the only aim of the exercise. Because what happens is when you consume media in the language, like whether it's reading, whether it's watching, whether it's listening, gradually you will find that because the words are repeated in different contexts, you're gonna understand the meaning eventually without ever having needed to know what it meant in English. So even if you don't understand it now, the more you come across that word, you will eventually understand it, just like a child does when they learn to speak. And then because you will have learned those words that way, when you need to think in French, they will come in your mind in French without you ever thinking about the English, because you never associated the English with that word in the first place. My fifth and last tip is when you're watching, listening, or reading French, try to memorize some phrases or sentences that you may need to use in the future. Doing this will help you because it will make you quicker in conversation, because you will simply be remembering what you've come across before rather than having to build your sentences from scratch. But also it will make you sound more natural and more fluent, because people usually speak using ready-made phrases and these don't often translate very well word for word. So therefore, if you memorize phrases and sentences that you hear or read, you will be using the phrases and sentences that natives use, and you won't be translating from what people use in your native language. So learning chunks of sentences will not only help you not translate in your head, but it will also help you avoid using pidgin French. So remember, for you to stop translating in your head and become fluent in French, you need to be consistent. So make reading, listening, and watching some French a part of your everyday life. It does not have to be for like an hour or two a day, even 20 minutes a day is far better than doing 1 hour and then doing nothing for 3 days. You know, it needs to be every day, even if it's for a short time, every day. It's far better than doing a lot in one day and nothing for a week. So, consistency is key. Read, listen, and watch some French every day. Ditch your bilingual dictionary if you're no longer a beginner. And think and speak to yourself in French as much as possible. And finally, learn new vocabulary within phrases or sentences that you hear or read. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, please ask in the comments below. À la prochaine. Bye.